Alright, I spent my entire slow day at work yesterday reading through this sub, so now I want to share my little story. My childhood best friend Marie and I were around 11 or 12 years old at the time. Marie's family had their own campsite in a provincial park about 2 hours from our hometown and would spend the entire summer each year living in their camper out there. This particular summer, I was able to go and stay with them for a week. We were excited to spend our time adventuring around the forest. On the last night that I was there, we decided we wanted to hurry down to the ice cream shop by the lake before it closed. It was early evening at this point, still pretty bright out, but beginning to lose light. The path we took was down a short slope right next to the main road with maybe 10 feet of thick brush and trees in between. On the other side was the forest with more tall, thick brush. So we were walking along, not seeing a single other person on the path in front of us or behind us. We hear a sudden rustling and snapping of branches, similar to the sound and maybe similar to the sound of maybe a deer moving through the woods. I wouldn't have thought anything of it, but then the sound of running footsteps follows. Marie glances back and suddenly grabs my arm, urging me under her breath not to look back. At the same time, the running stops. I don't know why I didn't ignore her and get a look myself. I guess I could sense the very fear in her voice and chose to listen. We both start to panic and getting that feeling like when you're running up the stairs after turning the basement light off. We pick up speed as much as we can without breaking into a sprint, knowing the ice cream shop is only about a minute walk away at this point. The path soon breaks and we are in the parking lot. Suddenly, Marie steers me hard to the left, heading towards the lake and the boat rental instead of continuing straight to the ice cream shop, and I go along with it, silently understanding ice cream is no longer an interest right now. Marie is clearly panicking at this point. We are both looking around, but it seems whatever scared her is nowhere in sight at this point. Marie walks up to the boat rental and gets us a kayak, and we climb in and begin paddling out in the middle of the lake. As we paddle, she tells me that there was a man behind us and that the man had stopped running at us very abruptly upon making eye contact with her. He had been wearing a long black coat with the hood up, despite it being the middle of July. Had a terrible smirk on his face, and she swore that as he stopped running, she saw him put something shiny away into his coat. He appeared to have just emerged out of the bushes after we walked past, giving the sounds we heard right before he came running onto the path. We reached the center of the lake and stopped paddling. I pulled out my Nokia brick phone that my parents had. Thank God given me, just quote unquote, just in case. I handed it to Marie and tell her to call her parents to come pick us up. As the phone rings, I see her look out past me to the shore and go pale. Lifting a hand to point to what she's seeing, I turned and there was the man, stalking his way around the path that circled the edge of the lake, staring out at us. We sat in the middle of the lake and watching him do 2 full laps, never looking away from us, before finally disappearing. It took a few tries to get a hold of her family. We were freaking out so bad the whole time. As the sun got lower and lower, we did manage to have someone come with the truck, but by the time we reached the shore, it was pretty dark outside. I don't know what we would have done if we hadn't been able to call for a ride. Looking back, I don't know why we didn't just go up to the ice cream shop, inform an adult there, and ask her parents to come get us then, but it worked out. We got back safe, and we thankfully never saw the man again. About 5 years ago, I lived downtown in a major city in the US. I've always been a night person, so I would often find myself bored after my roommate, who was decidedly not a night person, went to sleep. To pass the time, I used to go for long walks and spend the time thinking. I spent 4 years like this, walking alone at night and never once had a reason to feel afraid. I always used to joke with my roommate that even the drug dealers in the city were polite, but all that changed in just a few minutes of one evening. It was a Wednesday, somewhere between 1 and 2 in the morning, and I was walking near a police patrol park, quite a ways from my apartment. It was a quiet night, even for a weeknight, with very little traffic and almost no one on foot. The park, as it was most nights, was completely empty. I turned down a short side street in order to loop back to my apartment when I first noticed him. At the far end of the street on my side was the silhouette of a man, dancing. It was a strange dance, similar to a waltz, but he finished each box with an odd forward stride. I guess you could say he was dance walking, heading straight for me. Deciding he was probably drunk, I stepped as close as I could to the road to give him the majority of the sidewalk to pass by me. The closer he got, the more I realized how gracefully he was moving. He was very tall and lanky and wearing an old suit. He danced closer still until I could make out his face. His eyes were open wide and wild, head tilted back slightly, looking off at the sky. His mouth was formed in a painfully wide cartoon of a smile. Between the eyes and the smile, I decided to cross the street before he danced any closer. I took my eyes off of him to cross this empty street. As I reached the other side, I glanced back and then stopped dead in my tracks. He had stopped dancing and was standing with one foot in the street, perfectly parallel to me. He was facing me, but still looking down, still looking skyward, smile still wide on his lips. I was completely and utterly unnerved by this. I started walking again, but kept my eyes on the man. He didn't move. Once I had put a half a block between us, I turned away from him for a moment to watch the sidewalk in front of me. The streets and sidewalk ahead of me were completely empty. Still unnerved, I looked back to where he had been standing to find him gone. For the briefest of moments, I felt relief until I noticed him. He had crossed the street and was now slightly crouched down. I couldn't tell for sure due to the distance and the shadows, but I was certain he was facing me. I had looked away from him for no more than 10 seconds, so it was clear that he had moved very fast. I was so shocked that I stood there for some time staring at him, and then he started moving towards me again. He took giant, exaggerated tiptoe steps as if he was a cartoon character sneaking up on someone, except he was moving very, very quickly. I like to say at this point I ran away or pulled out my pepper spray or my cell phone or anything at all. But I didn't. I just stood there completely frozen as the smiling man crept towards me. and then he stopped again, about a car length away from me, still smiling his smile, still looking to the sky. When I finally found my voice, I blurted out the first thing that came to mind. What I meant to ask was, "What the fuck do you want?" In an angry, commanding tone. What came out was a whimper. What the fuck? What the fuck? Regardless of whether or not humans can smell fear, they can certainly hear it. I heard it in my own voice, and that only made me more afraid, but he didn't react to it at all. He just stood there smiling, and then, after what felt like forever, he turned around very slowly and started dancing, walking away. Just like that, not wanting to turn my back to him again, I just watched him go until he was far enough away to almost be out of sight, and then I realized something. He wasn't moving away anymore, nor was he dancing. I watched in horror as the distant shape of him grew larger and larger. He was coming back my way. He was coming back my way, and this time, he was running. I ran too. I ran until I was off the side road and back onto a better lit road with sparse traffic looking behind me. Then, he was nowhere to be found. The rest of the way home, I kept glancing over my shoulder, always expecting to see his stupid smile, but he was never there. I lived in that city for 6 months after that night, and I never went out for another walk. There was something about his face that always haunted me. He didn't look drunk. He didn't look high. He looked completely and utterly insane, and that's a very, very scary thing to see. This is a pretty short post, as I do not remember everything, and it wasn't an ongoing thing. About 3 years ago, I was on a trip with some family. In the hotel we were staying at, there were stairs you accessed at the end of the hallways, or alternatively, you took the elevator like any normal person would. When we were heading back to our room, it was at the end of the hallway. My sister and I challenged each other to a race. She would take the elevator and I would take the stairs. As soon as the elevator was at our floor, I started quickly walking down the bottom floor hallway to the stairs. Due to an injury, I am unable to run for a very long time. Once at the end of said hallway, I opened the door to the stairs and started upwards. When I had first entered, all the lights were on, but as I got further up, we were almost at the top floor. I heard lights clicking off further down, and then the creak of a door opening moments later on the floor, maybe 2 or 3 flights down. I assumed at first all the lights turned on when the doors were open and had motion sensors so that as one went up or down, they could turn off. However, when this door opened, only the lights on my floor and the ones above remained on. A door had definitely opened below, below me, so panic mode kicked in. As fast as I could, I went up the stairs. The lights were below turning off as I went. I could swear I always heard footsteps going up the flight just below me. When I finally got to my floor, I opened the door and closed it behind me and waited. My family had just got into the room as I did, and my sister said it was a tie. I tried to explain what happened, but everyone except my sis merely brushed it off as the lights probably weren't working. If someone was below me, why would they continue upward without lights? The whole thing freaked me out. I might have just been paranoid, but I definitely think I heard a door and footsteps. Rest of that trip, I took the elevator. When I was a kid, my family had moved into a new home. We were just settling into the new house and everything was going good until one night, probably 2 weeks after moving in. I went to bed with a weird feeling about my room. I can't describe the feeling, I just felt uncomfortable and off. I woke up in the middle of the night, cold. I opened my eyes and was about to get out of bed to grab another blanket. I stopped before I could even move an inch. An old, lean, pale man was staring at me from the corner of my room. Not moving, his wide, bloodshot red eyes were the first thing I saw. I was shocked. Adrenaline went through my body. I tried to say something, ask who he was, maybe, but nothing came out. I reckon I fainted from fear and stress, because the next thing I knew, it was morning. I didn't want to say anything to my parents in fear of seeming crazy, stupid. I know, the landlord came over that evening and talked about the house and how it was going. He asked my parents if they had any idea about the death of a man that had occurred in the house. A shiver went through my body as I froze in fear. I looked up at my parents, who looked as concerned as I was. The landlord chuckled and said, "It's seriously nothing to worry about. It was a natural death, not a murder." I still felt uncomfortable about the death, and it made me think, what if the man I saw last night was him? Before my parents could say anything, a man walked past our house and just stared at it for a couple of seconds before saying, "Nice house, isn't it?" It startled the landlord a bit as I saw him flinch. I could hear my parents talking to the man, but I didn't know what they were saying. I was more focused on where I had seen this man before. It didn't hit me. He looked exactly like the same as the man. He looked exactly the same as the man I saw last night. I was shocked, and I got suddenly hit back to reality when I heard the man say, Don't know if you know this, but my twin brother used to live here. He died of old age, unfortunately." At this point, I really wanted to say something to my parents about the man I saw yesterday night, but I couldn't do it. I didn't want to sound stupid. Later that night, we had a phone call from the previous owner's family. They just asked us simple things like if we had any questions and how it was going. I could hear the conversation since my mom put the call on speaker so my dad could talk to them as well. I was sitting on the couch playing on my Nintendo DS, just listening to the conversation. "I see the old owner has a twin brother. He walked past our house this evening." "What's his name?" my mom asked. The call went silent. The previous owner never had a twin brother. A member from the family on the call replied, "The man I saw in my room that night and the man that walked past our house that day was the ghost of the old dead owner." This is something that happened to me about 2 years ago, but thinking about it still gives me chills. I used to live in a small town in rural Missouri with my mother and stepfather. Our house was a few miles outside of town and along an old state highway. We were pretty isolated out there, other than the occasional passing car or farm equipment. One day I came home from a morning shift at work. I was pretty tired, so I immediately came in the front door and sprawled out on the couch. My mother and stepfather were preparing to go into town to visit a family friend, so I just started a movie and quickly drifted off to sleep. I remember waking up to the sound of my parents leaving. After that, I slept rather soundly. I must have been asleep for a couple hours before I was woken up to the sound of the front door opening and closing. I laid silently hoping to fall back asleep. I assumed it was just my parents returning from their visit. After a moment of silence, I heard an unfamiliar voice say, "Where is everybody?" My eyes shot open and I looked up to see a man standing over me. over me. I had never seen this man before. He was tall and muscular. He was wearing a white t-shirt with cut-off sleeves. He was also covered head to toe in blood. I jumped to my feet instantly. I have never been so scared in my life. Trying to rationalize, I asked, are you looking for my parents? He stared at me for a moment and asked who I was. I replied by asking, who are you and what the fuck are you doing in my house? He stared at me blankly. I thought I was going to be murdered. He kept talking incoherently and asking where everyone was. At this point, I had no idea who he was referring to. After about 5 minutes of nearly crippling fear, I realized that the blood that was all over his clothes and face was his own. I glanced out the living room window towards the highway, and then I started to understand. In the drainage ditch in the front of my house was a red pickup truck. I told the man to come with me, and we went outside. Soon after we got near the truck, another vehicle pulled up. Apparently the man had been drunk driving and had driven his truck into the ditch. He was so drunk and had a concussion from the wreck. He was so messed up. He was drunk and had a concussion from the wreck. He was so messed up that he had thought other people were in the truck with him before the wreck, when in fact he had been alone. He had stumbled into the nearest house looking for help. The driver that had just pulled up drove the man to the hospital, and as far as I knew, no, he was okay. Though I understand the situation now, I will never forget this. It was fucking terrifying. A week or so before my 10th birthday, I walked to the corner store with a $5 bill and picked up a jar of ragu for my mom. On my way home, a man I'd never seen before fell in step with me and began talking. "Hi," he said cheerfully. "My name is Dr. Ramsey. I'm a pediatrician. Do you know what a pediatrician is?" I walked along silently, not replying, and fervently hoping he would take that as a sign he should leave me alone. Subtleties were not his strong suit, though, because he kept right on chattering. "Are your parents looking for a pediatrician for you?" Of course. You're almost a big girl now. You'll be needing another kind of doctor soon, won't you?" That's okay, though. They can still bring you to me until then. What's your name? You have beautiful hair. I was just on my way to get some suckers for the candy jar in my office. Do you like suckers? Thankfully, we were nearing my house, so I ran forward up the back steps and through the kitchen door. I didn't know it then, but that was the beginning of a very long, very scary ordeal. It didn't take long after that for quote-unquote Dr. Ramsey to begin showing up. At first, it seemed benign enough, at least to a kid. He would drive by nearly every day, smiling and waving. I told my mom, who said maybe it was on his way home for work. But then the phone calls began. My dad called me into the living room and sat me down. He asked about the day Dr. Ramsey followed me home and if I talked to him. He said I wasn't in trouble, but that I needed to tell him the truth. I told him no, and he asked me if I was sure or could I be forgetting something. I told him no again, and he frowned and then asked, "Then how does he know your name?" I didn't know. It turns out that wasn't all he knew. He knew my sister's name as well. Pretty soon, neither my sister or I were allowed to answer the phone. He called several times a day. At first, neither of us knew what he was saying. Then one night, one of my brothers told us that he was telling my parents that he was going to hurt me and later my sister. Things got complicated after that. My dad had called the police, but as this was before there were any stalking laws, there was not a lot they could do. They told my parents to call back if he quote-unquote tried anything. My dad then called a friend of his from back in the day who happened to be a cop. For the next month, my dad's friend escorted me to and from school. Suddenly, life as I knew it came screeching to a halt. I couldn't walk to school alone. I couldn't play outside. I couldn't walk to Super America, which is sort of like a 7-Eleven for those of you who do not know. When access to me was completely denied, things escalated. It was around this time he began threatening my sister as well. Then one afternoon, my sister told two of my brothers, my mom and I. Then one afternoon, my sister, two of my brothers, and my mom and I were in the kitchen. One of my brothers saw a glimpse of someone in the garage. They seen him too. Dr. Ramsey came bolting out of the garage. My brothers chasing after him. They ran all the way to Cherokee Park, where he lost them in the trees. My parents called the police again, but nothing came of it. The only information that they had was a description and a name that was almost certainly fake. A couple weeks later, we woke to find our dog hanging from the side porch. She was a gorgeous saddlebag German Shepherd, born the same day I was. We were all devastated. The cops said there was no evidence it was him and ruled it accidental, but none of us believed that. His phone calls became more informative in the meantime. He would talk about who was home and who wasn't. If my brother would say my dad was home, he would tell them who was really in the house. He also would talk about the house itself, about the window in the kitchen he could easily open with a knife from the outside, even when it was locked, and about the French doors that connected the living room to the side porch, and how the lock could be finagled from the outside if you jiggle it just right. That night, my dad put in some carpenter nails at the bottom of the French doors until he could get a new lock ordered. My parents had to go to a company event for my dad's work. My older brothers were at St. West roller skating rink. My sister was on the phone with her best friend. My little brother was on the floor asleep. I was watching Devo on the midnight special with Wolfman Jack. It was late. Suddenly the top of the French door swung inward, and in the few milliseconds before the nails in the bottom caused them to snap back, I could see his silhouette. My sister whipped the phone at the television, and we ran up the stairs. About halfway up, we realized our little brother was still asleep on the living room floor. As quietly as we could, we slipped back down the stairs to get him. We all went into our bedrooms and didn't turn on the lights. This way we could see outside. We watched out the window for a while, and when we didn't find him, we crept down the hallway to our brother's room to look. We looked down and could see someone standing at the back door. He knocked loudly. "What do you want?" my sister asked out the window. He stepped back and said, "Is this the Mercy residence? I have a pizza for delivery. Can you come to the door?" She scoffed at him and declaring she was not stupid and she could see he didn't have a pizza and she was calling the cops. He left. A short while later, my brothers returned home. We told them what happened, and they walked around the yard watching for him. They came back in and things settled down. By now, we were pretty much giving up calling the cops because it never helped. So we just went back in. Each of us, except my youngest brother, still asleep, carrying a knife from the kitchen just in case. Eventually, one of my brothers went into the kitchen to get a bowl of cereal as a snack. You know, that sensation You get when you can just feel someone watching you. Yeah, he had that in spades. He kept looking around the kitchen, though the doorway into the dining room at the windows. He didn't see anything, but he could still feel eyes on him. So he went closer to the door to try to see better. The kitchen lights were reflecting on the windows of the door. It had 3 rows of 3. It had 3 rows of 3 windows, so he still couldn't see. He stepped closer, then closer again, until he was right up to the door. Then he cupped his hands on either side of his head so he could see, and there on the other side of the window pane was Dr. Ramsey smiling back at him. He turned to yell for my older brothers, and when he looked back again, he was gone. They went out again to look for him, but didn't see him. The next night, we were at the table playing Crazy Eights, and my brother was restless. My sister asked him what was wrong, and he said he always felt like any minute now there would be a boom on a door or window. Almost immediately after he finished his sentence, boom on the window right behind him. In the chaos, the 2 elders ran out, but he was already gone. A couple weeks later, I was at school and we were outside on the playground during recess. I was swinging upside down when I saw that now familiar blue Ford Galaxy cruising by, moving slowly. There he was, smiling and waving. He called my name and I ran to the teacher and told her. The school had been told all about him, and she took me inside right away and called my mom. That same day, my mom had gotten a call from the school office asking her to verify that my dad was picking me up, as he called to say he was on his way. He wasn't. Not long after I woke up one night, thirsty, I went down to the kitchen for a drink, and there, sitting alone in the dark, was my dad. On the table, a gun. He was tired of the police waiting until Dr. Ramsey, quote-unquote, tried something. He was tired of his children being terrorized. He was tired of being afraid every time he left for work that something would happen to us while he was gone. I sat with him for a good time, watching before he sent me back to bed. These events and many more took place over a period of around 18 months. Then as suddenly as it began, it was over. He had vanished from our lives. The phone calls, the drive-by with the creepy waves, everything. For a long time during and after Dr. Ramsey's days, I would have a recurring nightmare in which I would wake up to find him standing over me as I slept. It took a long time before I felt like a kid again. I found out years later that when he was calling, Dr. Ramsey would tell my parents that he was going to rape and kill me, and later my sister, and that there was nothing they could do about it. I don't know what happened to him, why he disappeared. I don't know if he was in a car wreck, locked in prison, in a coma, but sometimes I wonder if the wait ended for my dad when he was sitting in the darkened kitchen one night. I don't know, and I'm not sure I want to.